So, you've probably seen them all over the place, right? The lone wolf, the wise owl, these animal archetypes. But what if they're actually more than just some fun personality quiz? What if they're a map to how you personally operate under pressure? Well, today, we are decoding the powerful engine that runs behind all that imagery. Let's dive in.
You know, the biggest problem with most of these animal archetypes is that they just stop at the surface. They give you a cool picture, a label, and that's about it. But that misses the entire point. To really unlock their value, we have to look past the picture and start to understand the engine that's actually driving the whole pattern.
Okay, this right here is the single most important idea to get. Your animal is not your label. It's not a box to stick yourself in. Think of it more like a snapshot of a process that's always in motion. It's a picture of how your system learned to adapt when the pressure was really on.
And getting this difference is absolutely key. We're not talking about some fixed identity you're stuck with, and it's definitely not a diagnosis. Instead, the animal is just a really powerful analogy. It's an illustration that makes a complex, internal pattern way easier to see and to work with.
So, if the animal is just the picture on the box, what's the engine inside? Well, this is where the framework gets all of its power. The engine is called TAM, and that stands for a three-part sequence: trigger, adaptation, and mastery.
So how does this TAM engine actually work? Let's break down that core sequence, piece by piece.
The whole system is built on that core TAM sequence you see here: trigger, adaptation, and mastery. Now, there's also a fourth piece we're going to cover called TCAM, which is basically what happens when this entire system gets knocked back into survival mode.
Let's start right at the beginning with the trigger. This is simply what your system reacts to. It's the specific kind of pressure or event that flips the switch on a particular protective pattern. You can think of it as the if in the if-then logic of how we adapt.
And look, these triggers aren't just vague feelings. They're often very specific types of information from our environment. So for example, a trigger might be a sudden sense of uncertainty or real danger. It could be an interruption, instability, or even the feeling of betrayal. These are the things that kick that adaptive system into gear.
Okay, next up, how does a knee-jerk survival reaction evolve into a genuine skill? This is the journey from adaptation to mastery.
So once a trigger fires, the system develops an adaptation. And notice that key phrase in there. It's what the system learned to do. This isn't just some random reaction, it's a functional, learned behavior that at some point served a really important protective purpose.
So what does that look like in the real world? Well, an adaptation might be learning to scan your environment early for threats, or to stay really quiet in chaotic situations. It could be about holding the line under pressure, narrowing your focus down to a single point, or just moving very, very carefully when things feel off.
And this is where the framework stops just describing things and really shifts into growth. When that old survival pattern becomes well-regulated, it actually evolves. That's what we call mastery. It's the exact same pattern, but now it's been transformed into a stable, useful skill that you can actually offer to the world.
I mean, this is the whole goal of understanding your pattern in the first place. Mastery is that point where a survival trait becomes a genuine strength, a reliable skill that helps not just you, but the people around you too.
But here's the thing. That state of mastery isn't permanent. If you're under enough stress, it can be disrupted. And that brings us to the final piece of the model, what's called the TCAM Shift.
TCAM is that recognizable shift you feel when the pressure just gets too high. It's that moment your regulated, useful skill suddenly reverts back to its original survival programming, and it becomes more rigid, more reactive, and way more defensive. This distinction is so important. TCAM is not a dark version of you or some evil twin. That's way too dramatic. It's actually a really practical concept. It's just a disruption of mastery. It's a predictable vulnerability to stress that pulls you right back into survival logic. There's nothing mystical about it.
So, that's the theory. Now let's see how this whole thing actually works in practice. We're going to walk through a complete case study, the bison pattern.
Here, you can see the entire sequence in one place. For the bison pattern, the trigger is a threat to the group. The adaptation, brace and hold the line. In mastery, this becomes this grounded, collective protection for everyone. But under too much stress, that's the TCAM shift, that same instinct becomes rigid and leads to collision and forceful control. The logic, you can see, is clear and consistent all the way through.
And this just shows how versatile this TAM engine is.
You can apply the exact same logic to understand completely different styles. Whether it's the falcon's incredible speed or the turtle's steady endurance, that core sequence of trigger, adaptation, mastery, and the TCAM shift, it always holds true.
So, if you take anything away from this whole explainer, let it be these 4 points. First, your animal is not your label. Second, TAM is the engine. The animal is just the illustration. Third, mastery is what that adaptation looks like when it's regulated. And finally, TCAM is just a practical model for what happens when that mastery gets disrupted.
Which brings us to the final, and honestly, the most important question. The goal here isn't really to ask, what animal are you? Because that's just a label. The real question, the one that opens up genuine understanding, is this: what does your pattern protect?